A plane vanished without a trace. 57 lives erased from the sky. No wreckage, no signal, just silence. Decades later, it returned, untouched, unchanged, impossible. The passengers were alive, but something wasn't right. How could time betray them so completely, and what horror awaited anyone who got too close? Late in the summer of 1955, something happened in the sky that no one could explain. A plane carrying dozens of people simply disappeared, not with a crash, not with a warning, but as if it had been erased from the world. On July 2nd, Flight 914 prepared for its evening journey from New York to Miami. The airport was alive with noise and movement. Families stood close together, sharing hugs and last words. Some passengers were heading home, others were starting vacations. For them, it was just another normal flight. Captain Robert Linwood walked confidently toward the aircraft, greeting a few passengers as he passed. He had flown this route many times. The crew trusted him. The passengers felt safe, knowing an experienced pilot was in control. At 6:47 p.m., the engines roared to life. The aircraft slowly moved across the runway, then lifted into the orange evening sky. Inside the cabin, everything felt calm. People chatted, read newspapers, or simply closed their eyes to rest. No one knew they were part of a moment that would soon become one of the strangest mysteries in aviation history. For the first 2 hours, the flight went exactly as planned. The weather was clear. The communication between the cockpit and air traffic control was normal. Nothing seemed wrong. Then, suddenly, the radio went silent. At first, the controllers in Miami thought it was just a small signal problem. It happens sometimes. They called out to the aircraft again and again. No answer. Minutes passed, then more minutes. The radar operator stared at the screen, confused. The small moving dot that represented Flight 914 began to flicker. It shifted slightly off its path, then froze. And then it was gone. Not slowly, not fading, just gone. The control room filled with tension. Calls were made immediately. Nearby aircraft were asked if they could see anything unusual. No one reported smoke. No one reported a crash. The sky was clear and empty. Search teams were sent out within hours. Planes scanned the ocean. Ships moved across the expected flight path. Day turned into night, and night into morning. Still, there was nothing. No wreckage. No floating debris, no signal. It was as if the aircraft had never existed. As the days passed, fear turned into confusion. Confusion turned into silence. Families waited for news that never came. But one question refused to go away. How does a plane disappear in the middle of a clear sky without leaving behind a single trace? The radar operator almost ignored the signal at first. It appeared without warning, a small, moving dot on the screen where nothing should have been. For a moment, he thought it was a technical glitch, but the dot stayed, and it was getting closer. It was a quiet afternoon in March 1992 at Caracas International Airport in Venezuela. Flights were landing and taking off as usual. Controllers spoke calmly into their headsets, guiding aircraft through clear skies. Everything felt routine. Then the unknown signal appeared. One of the controllers leaned forward, staring at the screen. The aircraft was not listed on the arrival schedule. There was no record of it entering their airspace, no identification code, no warning. It was simply there. He reached for the radio. His voice was steady, but confusion crept in. Unidentified aircraft approaching Caracas airspace, please identify yourself. For a few seconds, there was only static, a low, empty sound that filled the room. Then a voice answered, "This is Flight 914 from New York to Miami. We are preparing to land." The controller frowned. He checked the flight lists again. No such flight was expected. Thinking he heard wrong, he spoke again. "Repeat your flight number?" The reply came back, this time slower, as if the speaker was unsure. "Flight 914. We departed New York, requesting landing instructions." A cold silence fell over the control room. One of the older staff members looked up sharply. The number sounded familiar, too familiar. Flight 914. That was the same flight that had disappeared decades ago. The controller quickly checked the date on the old records. His hands felt stiff as he turned the pages. The missing flight from 1955 had the exact same number. His heart began to pound. He looked out through the glass windows toward the sky. At first, he saw nothing. Then, far in the distance, a small shape appeared. It was moving slowly, gliding toward the airport. As it came closer, details became clearer. The aircraft looked old. Not just old, outdated. The design belonged to another time. Its body was slightly worn, its paint faded. It didn't look like any plane that should still be flying. People in the tower began to gather near the windows. No one spoke. No one moved. The controller picked up the radio again, trying to stay calm. "Flight 914, please confirm your departure city?" The answer came quickly. "New York. We left a few hours ago." A few hours. The controller slowly lowered the microphone. His throat felt dry. If this really was Flight 914, then how could a plane that vanished 37 years ago be asking to land as if nothing had happened? And more importantly, who exactly was flying it? The moment the wheels touched the runway, a heavy silence fell across the entire airport. No one clapped. No one spoke. The aircraft rolled forward slowly, as if it were unsure where it had arrived. Every person watching felt the same chilling thought at the same time. Something about this landing didn't feel right. The plane finally came to a stop, and for a few seconds, nothing happened. Ground staff stood at a distance, unsure whether to approach. The aircraft looked like it had come straight out of another era. Its metal body was dull, marked with age. The airline logo was one that hadn't been used for decades. Then, slowly, the door opened. A flight attendant stepped out first. She looked calm but confused, her uniform old-fashioned, perfectly matching the style of the 1950s. She glanced around, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. Her expression changed from curiosity to quiet fear. Behind her, passengers began to appear. Men in dark suits and narrow ties, women in long dresses and styled hair. Everything about them belonged to another time. They looked normal, healthy, and strangely untouched by age. An airport officer carefully stepped forward, his voice gentle. "Welcome to Caracas. Are you all right?" The flight attendant hesitated before answering. "Caracas? We were heading to Miami." The officer paused, choosing his words. "Ma'am, what year do you believe it is?" She looked confused. "It's 1955. The officer felt a chill run through him. He glanced at his colleagues, then back at her. "It's 1992, he said quietly. The words seemed to freeze the air. Passengers standing near the door began to murmur. One man laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. Another passenger shook his head in disbelief. A woman gripped her handbag tightly, her eyes wide with fear. The pilot soon stepped out, his face tense. "What is going on here?" he asked. "Why are you saying it's 1992? Someone handed him a newspaper. His hands trembled slightly as he looked at the date printed across the front page. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his face turned pale. The passengers were slowly stepping off the plane now, looking around at the modern vehicles, the strange uniforms, the unfamiliar airport. The world they knew was gone. Everything had changed. And yet, they hadn't. They looked exactly as they must have looked the day they boarded the flight. Not older, not weaker, just confused and afraid. But as the airport staff moved closer, preparing to ask questions, something shifted in the pilot's expression. His eyes moved quickly, scanning the runway, the tower, the people watching. It was no longer just confusion on his face. It was fear.
Without warning, the calm on the runway shattered. Just as airport staff began walking closer to the aircraft, the deep roar of engines suddenly filled the air. The sound was loud, aggressive, and completely unexpected. People froze where they stood. The plane that had just safely landed was coming back to life. Inside the cockpit, the pilot was no longer the same confused man who had stepped out moments earlier. His face had hardened. His eyes moved quickly, almost desperately, as if he had just realized something terrible. Ground officers raised their hands, signaling for him to shut down the engines. One of them shouted, "Please stay where you are. We need to speak with you." But the pilot didn't respond. Instead, the propellers spun faster. The entire aircraft began to shake. Passengers who had stepped off the plane stood near the stairs, confused and frightened. A few quickly rushed back inside, as if they had been told to return. The door slammed shut. Controllers in the tower grabbed their radios. "Flight 914, stop immediately. You are not cleared for departure." Only static answered them. The aircraft slowly began to move, turning toward the runway again. Ground staff backed away, unsure what to do. No one wanted to stand in front of a moving plane. The situation was slipping out of control. The engines grew louder. The old aircraft picked up speed, rolling faster and faster across the runway. In the control tower, panic began to rise. "Block the runway!" someone shouted, but it was too late. Within seconds, the aircraft lifted off the ground. People below watched in shock as the aircraft climbed into the sky, just like it had done 37 years earlier. For a brief moment, the sunlight reflected off its metal body, making it look almost unreal. Then, as it gained height, something small fell from the open side window of the cockpit. It landed on the runway with a soft thud. Airport security quickly ran toward it after the plane disappeared into the clouds. It was a worn brown notebook, a pilot's flight log. The pages were old and fragile. The writing inside was shaky, rushed, and uneven. One entry caught everyone's attention. "Strange clouds ahead. Instruments are failing. Bright light all around. We are not moving forward, but we are not falling either." The last line was written darker than the rest, as if pressed in fear. "Time feels wrong." That was the final entry. Above them, the sky was now empty again. No radar signal, no sound, nothing. For the second time in history, Flight 914 had vanished, and this time it left behind a message that made the mystery even terrifying. The runway was empty again, but the fear it left behind refused to fade. For several minutes after the plane disappeared, no one at the airport spoke. The sky above Caracas looked calm and ordinary, as if nothing had happened. But on the ground, people stood frozen, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. In the days that followed, the story spread quietly among officials and investigators. The flight log that had fallen from the cockpit became the center of attention. Experts studied every page carefully. The paper was old, worn, and clearly from another time.
The handwriting matched records from 1955. There was no sign it had been created recently. The final entries disturbed everyone who read them. The pilot had described a strange cloud that didn't look natural. He wrote about instruments failing all at once, a bright light surrounding the aircraft, a feeling that the plane was stuck, as if it had stopped moving but hadn't crashed. And then that final sentence, the one that stayed in people's minds. Time feels wrong. Investigators began comparing the names listed in the logbook with records from the missing flight decades earlier. One by one, the names matched. Every passenger, every crew member, the same people who had been declared lost in 1955. But what frightened them most was something no report could explain. Witnesses at the airport all told the same story. The passengers who stepped off the plane looked exactly as they must have looked on the day they first boarded. Not older, not changed, just confused, as if only a few hours had passed for them. For the world, nearly 40 decades had gone by. Families of the missing passengers were contacted quietly. Many had spent years believing their loved ones were gone forever. Some had kept photographs, letters, and old memories locked away. Now they were being told something impossible, that those same people had been seen alive. And then, just as suddenly as hope began to rise, it was taken away again. Flight 914 never appeared on radar after that day. No airport reported seeing it. No wreckage was found. It was as if the plane had slipped back into whatever had taken it the first time. Scientists offered theories. Some spoke about unknown weather conditions. Others mentioned rare time distortions. A few refused to explain it at all. But deep down, no one truly understood what happened in the sky that day. Some nights, air traffic controllers still remember that strange signal that appeared from nowhere. The voice on the radio asking for landing instructions, the old aircraft touching the runway like it had returned from the past. And one question still remains unanswered and unsettling. If Flight 914 really was lost between time once before, is it possible that somewhere, even now, it's still flying, waiting to return again?